During COVID-19 is when I first started trying to improve myself, and that's when I came across this interesting thing. It was called gynecomastia. Now, at first, I didn't know what this was, but the more I looked into it, the more I started questioning if I had gynecomastia. And as anyone would do, I tried to check, and to my surprise, I did. At the time, I was at my heaviest weight. I was at around 200 pounds, and I had a skinny fat physique. When I found that I actually had gynecomastia, it kind of bothered me because when I really started to inspect it, it kind of reminded me of um, it kind of reminded me of something a woman might have because it's literally just man titties with large nipples. And obviously this is an exaggeration, but the point is you do kind of resemble a woman if you have gynecomastia. At the time, I wasn't proud of it, and I truly wanted a change. I was able to change it. Now still do suffer with, I still do suffer with it to a certain extent, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. So my goal is to help you overcome this through my personal experiences and trial and error. Alright, so the first thing is you really just have to understand how gynecomastia even occurs. So gynecomastia usually happens when there's like an imbalance of hormones that you have. So this can be like if you have your testosterone is if you have low testosterone and then you have high estrogen, that's like an imbalance of hormones because as a guy, your testosterone should be higher than your estrogen for it to be normal. If you don't know what testosterone and estrogen are, they're basically the male and female sex hormones. Testosterone is primarily responsible for muscle mass in men, and estrogen is primarily responsible for giving women the what we perceive to be as feminine features. Obviously as a guy, you do have some level of estrogen, so it's not going to be zero. Like you do have estrogen. It's actually, if you didn't have estrogen, that would be a problem because it helps with your bones and stuff. But you do have estrogen. But if you have gynecomastia, your estrogen is much higher than it should be. That is causing you to develop gynecomastia. Because what gynecomastia actually is breast tissue. It's the development of breast tissue. And this is a function that would happen in women mostly, but if it's happening to you, then it's because you have higher levels of estrogen than you do testosterone. But you may be curious on, well, you may be asking, how do you even get higher levels of estrogen? Like, why is that happening to me? But, that'll be the main focus right now. It comes down to two things. It comes down to your body fat percentage and it comes down to your diet. And I'll elaborate further on this. So ideally, we want to optimize our testosterone. So we want to maximize the amount of testosterone we have, and we want to minimize the amount of estrogen we have. So right now, what you have, if you have gynecomastia, it probably looks like this. This is like the estrogen, and this is the testosterone. So we want to switch that. We want to have higher testosterone. We want to have lower estrogen. So let's start by talking about body fat percentage. So your body fat's actually associated with this hormone called aromatase, and this hormone is responsible for converting your testosterone into estrogen. Now, the more body fat you have, the more aromatase you have, and effectively the more testosterone being converted into estrogen. So, as you can imagine, we don't want to lose testosterone and gain estrogen. That's how we got here. That's how we got high estrogen, low testosterone. We want to flip that over. So, effectively to do that, we have to minimize our body fat percentage. And what's interesting is that it could also become a cycle too. So what your body fat does is it increases your levels of estrogen, and when you have high levels of estrogen, your brain's actually telling your body that it doesn't need to produce as much testosterone, so your testosterone gets lower. But if your testosterone gets lower, you gain fat more easily. And if you gain more fat more easily, then it's just a cycle. It repeats. So you can see how obesity can form in people because this cycle just keeps repeating, and it's like a destructive cycle. So you can see how body fat is probably the most important thing that we have to address before anything else. Before you think, okay, let me just go on an insane diet, let me just never eat food again. Before you do that, you have to consider, is that even sustainable? Are you able to live that long without like eating food? You can't, and that's the honest answer. Um, but what you can do is you can change your lifestyle. And if you are skinny fat, I actually made a video for that. You'll see it over here. You'll see it over here. But if you're skinny fat, that basically means you have more fat than you do muscle, and you will look something like this if you have higher fat than you do muscle. So I did summarize a lot in that video, but so I did talk about a lot in that video, but to summarize, basically if you're skinny fat, what you want to do is you want to go on what's called a clean bulk. So basically you're eating just a bit over your calories, and then you're consuming an adequate amount of protein, and you're also resistance training in the gym. What this does is a few things. So when you consume a lot of protein, what that does is it helps build muscle, but then what it also does is protein is actually harder to digest for your body. So it'll actually burn calories instead of it'll actually burn a lot of calories to even digest the protein. So that's why you want to have a lot of protein, because you'll build muscle and you'll also burn calories doing it. So your metabolism is going up like 2 times when you consume higher protein because of the muscle mass. So muscle also increases your metabolism because I summarized in that video, it's like having like more cells in your body that need more nourishment. So if you have more cells, then your body needs to expend more calories to just keep those cells alive. So that's why you need to build muscle. The reason you're bulking and you're not cutting right away, because when you bulk, muscle is actually easier to build, right? And then if muscle is actually easier to build, you'll build more muscle, and then when you cut, it's actually going to be easier because it's going to be much easier since your metabolism's already high, and you'll look better too because you have more muscle around. So you're going to be wanting to consume protein at around 1 gram per pound, basically. So if you're not skinny fat, if you're fat, then it's basically the same principle, just that you have to cut first, because at that point it's going to be like really hard to even, because at that point your fat is just excessive. So you want to cut just a bit until you're at like a decent body fat, and then you bulk. So you don't want to like cut all the way. You just want to get to like a level where you're like closer to skinny fat than anything, and then you bulk. And then I'd like to mention like a pro tip. Weight training also increases testosterone, so you're also gaining testosterone through there as well. And now the second thing to balancing your hormones is the diet you eat. So you're gonna be shocked, but a lot of the foods that you're used to consuming and you're taught to believe is actually healthy for you actually does the opposite. So a lot of foods actually contain these things called phytoestrogens, which basically act like estrogen in your body. They're not estrogen, but it acts like estrogen in your body. And the more and more you consume of these, the more and more estrogenic compounds you're putting into your body, and the more and more you actually will bear the side effects of having a lot of estrogen, which is gynecomastia. So this list isn't extensive, but here are just some foods that I would avoid if you're trying to limit the amount of estrogen in your body. I would avoid most milk. So I'm not saying avoid all milk, I'm saying avoid most milk. Why? Well, the way milk is actually processed and made is very interesting. So what they do is the milk, they obviously have to feed the cows something to produce milk, right? So they feed them food. It's usually a mixture of soy and then grains, and usually not the highest quality of grains. So it's like a lot of like moldy grains that they feed them. And the soy contains a lot of phytoestrogens, so that's one bad thing. And then the other bad thing is like the moldy grains that they eat, like the cheap moldy grains, and it contains a compound called zeah, which actually ends up in your milk. I wish this was the only thing wrong with milk, but there's actually a lot more to it too. So even the packaging of the milk is not good, because if you live in like most places, they'll usually put the milk in like these plastic containers or plastic bags. And what that does is basically leaches microplastics into the milk, and microplastics are very estrogenic. Like like if you consume microplastics, that's a very estrogenic. It's not good for you. It's estrogenic, right? So you drink that. So there's already three things working against you. Three things that they are make milk very estrogenic. So that's why I'd avoid milk. But if you have to have milk, what you can have instead is grass-fed milk that's ideally in a glass jug or container. So that way you will be consuming non-estrogenic milk in non-estrogenic packaging. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, what about like the cartons of milk, like the ones that like are made out of like paper or cardboard? Well, those are actually bad too, because if you've ever noticed, if you do this, like if you have a piece of cardboard at home and you pour water on it, or you have a piece of paper at home and you pour water on it, it'll actually leak through. But why doesn't it do that for the jug? Well, the reason it doesn't is because they coat it with this thin film of plastic that actually leaches, I think, even more microplastics inside the milk. So that's definitely a no go. As well. So I would avoid milk in anything other than glass containers, and it has to be grass fed. So on the topic of grass fed, you also want to make sure that you're consuming, if you are consuming meat, you want to consume grass fed meat as well. Because think about that same cow that ate that moldy grain and that ate that soy mixture. Its milk is contaminated, so its meat is probably even more contaminated. So watch out for that. Now you also may be thinking, what about dairy products? Are dairy products any good? Well, actually, no. If they're not grass fed dairy products, then they're probably just as bad or even worse too. Protein powder is like basically like condensed dairy, so it would be on an even more estrogenic scale if you consumed protein powder that isn't grass fed. I remember buying this bag of protein pancake mix that was like really cheap, but it was like low quality, non grass fed protein powder. And I noticed like a lot of acne forming on my face, because that just goes to show like how my hormones are getting disrupted, right? Acne is a form of like hormone disruption. So when you have like an imbalance of hormones, you generally form acne. So that's just like an example from what I've used. So if you're gonna get protein powder, also make sure that it's like a grass fed way and not like grain fed, or like if it doesn't say grass fed, then it's probably not grass fed, because that's like a premium thing. So sure, you're spending like $5 more, but you're helping yourself even more to get even more gains, because if you have low testosterone, then you won't produce muscle at as fast a pace as someone who is actually high in testosterone. That's the point of steroids. Another thing is seed and vegetable oil. So a lot of seeds and a lot of the things they use are actually like the seed, like a lot of seeds are actually estrogenic that they use, like the cheap seeds, right? These seeds are like estrogenic. So when they take a bunch of these and compress it into like a small thing of oil, imagine how much more estrogen that has. And that's not even the worst part. A lot of them also contain things called trans fats, which I'm sure you heard of a lot. These things are known to actually increase body fat, and as we know, you don't want to increase body fat, because increased body fat leads to more of these aromatase hormones that convert your testosterone into estrogen. So that's like a no-go. So like soybean oil, especially soybean oil. Soybeans are they're very high in phytoestrogens. But then also avoid flax seeds. So flax seeds are commonly like a health product. If you've read like its benefits, you'll probably see that it has like a lot of benefits when it comes to women using them, because it actually decreases testosterone, and a decrease in testosterone leads to a boost of estrogen, especially in women. So they should be supplementing with that, but you shouldn't, because it'll mess up your hormones and you'll get gyno. And then it also contains a high amount of omega-6, which also has a negative impact on your testosterone. So then you may be asking, if I can't use oil, then what can I use? Well, you can use oil, but just make sure it's olive oil. Or you could use, if you have to use some form of fat molecule, you could use butter, but make sure it's grass fed. If it's not grass fed butter, then we're going back to the dairy product thing that we talked about earlier. And then also ghee butter, which is just basically clarified butter. Now, the third thing, which I was actually kind of surprised about when I found out because I consume it a lot, it's actually mint. Mint is very estrogenic. Yeah, mint is very estrogenic. So I used to drink a lot of tea, and I would usually like to put like mint leaves into my tea, but that actually decreases testosterone. So the exact reason it actually decreases testosterone is still unknown. They're still researching this, but it does lead to a significant decrease in testosterone. So much so that even like women with PCOS, which is like an ovary disease, they actually drink tea to help them with the side effects of that. Because what PCOS is it's basically this disease for women that affects their ovaries, and they usually produce like a lot of hormones like testosterone that they don't want, because women don't want testosterone just like men don't want estrogen, right? So they produce a lot of testosterone. So they'll drink a lot of this tea to help them with the side effects and to decrease this testosterone. So that's how much it actually impacts your testosterone level. So you do not want to be consuming mint at all. Not even in tea, not in gum, not in like any form of mint. Toothpaste is like the one exception, but if you can find some form of toothpaste that isn't like mint based, then that would be ideal. So you may be asking, you've said a lot, and I'm not sure what I can eat anymore. Well, you want to be consuming a lot of food that is just like wholesome in general. So like things like grass fed meat or eggs or fish, or even like consuming salt. So salt is actually healthier than sugar because surprisingly, they did this study where it's like rodents who were high in salt were actually had higher testosterone than the rats that weren't. So just remember, um, salt is better than sugar. So if you can put salt instead of sugar, do that. And I know I've said a lot of things, but there's a whole lot more of food that actually decreases testosterone. So if you're ever curious about something you eat regularly and its impacts on your testosterone, make sure to check it out. Like you could search up, is for example broccoli estrogenic, and you'll usually get an answer if it's a yes or no. But make sure to look at like the credible articles. A lot of people, like if you read on Reddit, a lot of people will just like say whatever. But you want to look at like the peer reviewed articles like Healthline and stuff like that. Those are really good websites. Another tip for eating better food is actually downloading this app. It's available on iPhone and Android. It's called Yuka. I'll link it down in the description. And it helps by scanning certain food items and actually telling you what's really inside them. So it'll tell you if there's like a preservative that's known to be like an endocrine disruptor, for example. Um, your endocrine actually produces a lot of hormones that are important for you, and like having these endocrine disruptors can imbalance your hormones, and you could actually lead to developing even more gynecomastia if you do have that around you. If you do consume a lot of endocrine disruptors, they're usually found in preservatives and stuff. So I would keep an eye out for that. So in conclusion, we talked about the causes of gynecomastia, how we want to increase testosterone and decrease estrogen. And to do that, we have to monitor our diet and our body fat percentage. And we know that body fat percentage is actually bad for testosterone because it turns testosterone into estrogen. And we know that a lot of foods are bad for our diet because they contain a lot of phytoestrogens which act like estrogen. So if you learned something new from this video, make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions, you can email me over here. Other than that, take care.